There are three ranked matchups to kick us off in week one this weekend, highlighted by the number one Georgia Bulldogs and ACC hopeful Clemson Tigers out in Atlanta. The Dogs are 13.5-point favorites and have garnered over 70% of the handle this far. The trend here, though, if you can guess, the public is liking the favorites here, both A&M and LSU also getting over 60% of the handle in their ranked matchup as well, as we welcome in college football analysts Brett McMurphy and Colin Wilson. Guys, we're going to go a little pinball here, answer some pressing questions ahead of week one, talk about a bunch of these ranked games. I'm going to start with you, Colin. Who has the most to lose this weekend?
Well, it's absolutely Notre Dame because they do not have a conference championship game. So there are three important games on this schedule that they have to capitalize if they want to catch the college football playoff committee's interest. Those three games are this one, Texas A&M, Florida State, and USC. This is a bad news for Riley Leonard. He transfers into Notre Dame. He's got to go up against his former head coach, who's now at Texas A&M. He loses his stud left tackle, a blindside tackle. It's setting up to be a very havoc-minded game where the Notre Dame offensive line may not be prepared for what they're about to see. So Notre Dame absolutely could still make the playoff losing this game, but this is one of the big ones that they have to have.
Right. Always the negative of not playing in a conference, having to rely on just a couple of key games here down the stretch to, even in an expanded format, they're going to have to win some of these big games. Of course, that A&M one I just mentioned earlier is up on the list. They're +3 right now, Notre Dame, heading into College Station. Brett, we saw Florida State go down this past week in week 0. You're targeting an ACC team here when it comes to who has more to lose.
Yeah, I think Miami, this is a huge game for Miami. They go up to Gainesville, but I agree with Colin about Notre Dame. If they lose to A&M, they've got to win out. 10-2 Notre Dame with the lost A&M. Enjoy the Pop-Tarts Bowl. For Miami, look, it's a non-conference game, but this is a huge game for the Hurricanes. Make no mistake. And look, I'm guilty. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid on Miami. I'm picking them to win the ACC, go to the playoff. They cannot do that if they lose to Florida. Yeah, I know it's not an ACC game, but if they can't beat Florida, they can't win the ACC. This is the most talented team Mario Cristobal's had since he's been with the Hurricanes. You bring in Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, arguably the top two transfer quarterback running back duo in the country. Cristobal told me over the summer, this is the best offensive line he's had at Miami. Cristobal is an offensive line guy. That's where Miami's been weak before in the past. Tyler Van Dyke is gone. Ward comes in. I think he improves Miami's dreadful goal line offense that really killed them last year. Expectations are really high. Charlie, you mentioned Florida State's loss. Now winning the ACC, maybe it's not going to be that tough. Maybe Florida State is not as good as we thought. But simply, you cannot lose to a Florida team that's projected to only win 5 games, even though the game's on the road. It's going to be a nail biter. I think it goes down to the fourth quarter, but Miami needs this win desperately.
Totally agree with you on Miami needing this win. And then you look down the schedule of the Hurricanes, every game basically winnable, even that Florida State game, because you saw just how dicey they were against Georgia Tech. Maybe it was the week 1 jitter. But Colin, Brett, I'm going to pinball right back to you on the next question here. We're going to look toward the weekend, the entire slate of games. Obviously, there's so many to choose from. There's spreads up to 48. There's spreads down to just a pick 'em. Brett, the biggest upset is coming where?
I almost picked Temple, but then I figured you won't have me back next week. So I went with Georgia Southern against Boise State. This is the highest profile team to play in Statesboro, and I don't know how long. Probably the closest comparison, at least recently, was a couple of years ago. James Madison, yes, James Madison, comes into Statesboro ranked number 25 in the country, nearly a 2-touchdown favorite, and guess what? They lost to Georgia Southern. This will be the biggest home dog roll at home under Clay Helton. The Eagles have had this game circled all off season because Boise State gets all the national headlines. They're the obvious favorite. They're even the trendy pick to go to the college football playoff from the group of 5. But you look at Boise's schedule. Who do they play next week? Oregon. Is it possible they're peeking ahead a little bit to Oregon and overlooking this Georgia Southern team? That's a possibility. The other thing why I like Georgia Southern in this role is Boise comes from the pleasant, beautiful weather, and I've been to Boise, of Boise, Idaho. Now you're coming to play in hot, humid conditions in Georgia. Georgia Southern may look to wear them down in the second half.
13-point favorites are Boise State, and you mentioned the trendy pick to unseat possibly Liberty, who are the favorites to come out of that group of five. Mike Calabrese, it's a little stab in the heart for him and his Boise State 600-1 national championship future. If week one, it's already dead. Colin, you're taking a little bit of a safer approach here, not taking a 13, 14-point spread. You're going to that USC LSU game I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I am going to go to USC over LSU on Sunday night. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I just threw cold water all over Boise State on the podcast with Calabrese, so this would be a bad loss. But I'm going to do Sunday night. Let's talk about USC winning outright against LSU, and tell me what has improved on this LSU defense during the offseason. They went out and got defensive coordinator Blake Baker from Missouri. But this is no prize. I mean, Missouri ended last season outside the top 100 in opponent explosives, outside the top 100 in defensive finishing drives, which means everybody got a touchdown when they got past the 40-yard line. The LSU defensive line projects to be one of the worst units of all of the SEC teams. The secondary really isn't too far behind that. And the defense last year for the Tigers, the LSU Tigers, was terrible in every single aspect, dead last in passing down explosives allowed. That's just all of a sudden going to resolve itself. I don't see it going against USC's Miller Moss, who's going to have Zachariah Branch and other huge weapons in an offense, in Lincoln Riley's offense here. And oh, by the way, I love the USC defense, which I know we're going to keep talking about, but there is just a major mismatch here when it comes to expectations of what LSU's defense actually is.
Colin, I know we're in the preseason of football and GDD is not back till next week, but you're only giving me a 4.5-point dog?
I was going to go Colorado State at 31 points, but I mean, come on. I might not be invited back either. So,
Listen, Temple would have been fun. Colorado State would have been fun. That would have gotten the juices flowing. But if you look toward it. Yeah, but if you look toward, I'm going to kick it right back to you because this just answers my next question. Who has more to lose on Sunday night? Who's under more pressure, Brian Kelly or Lincoln Riley? Obviously, you're going to go with Brian Kelly.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Brian Kelly simply because the defense has gone in reverse every single season. And when you bring in a coach like Brian Kelly, the goal isn't just get to the SEC championship. It's win the SEC championship and compete for national titles, which they're not doing. Now, I mentioned the defensive coordinator that's been hired. That's the biggest difference here because last year LSU allowed 6 of their 8 SEC opponents to score at least 30 points. And there's been no improvement here. With USC and Lincoln Riley, he went out and got former head coaches, huge defensive minds, and stole UCLA's defensive coordinator who had completely revamped the UCLA defense. I have full expectations that USC's defense is going to have a turnaround, no expectations around LSU. So Brian Kelly's the one here that's in trouble.
Well, Brett, Colin curb stomped USC or LSU, that is, over the last 2-3 minutes. You think Lincoln Riley actually has more to lose? You gotta come to his help, Brian Kelly's help.
Well, it's not that I'm helping Brian Kelly. I just think Lincoln's got more pressure. On Saturday for Lincoln, it will be a belated 41st happy birthday. He turns 41 on Thursday. But USC has an entirely new defensive staff. Wait, this just in. Wait, they did not have a defensive staff last year. Look, they've got to be improved defensively. All the things that Colin laid out. But can they be? If they're not, that's a lot of pressure on Riley. There were reports out this summer that USC for the past year tried to get out of playing this game. They did not want to open with LSU because of the increased schedule of going to the Big Ten. You add into the fact the Big Ten, this is their first game officially as members of the Big Ten, obviously not a conference game, in a national spotlight. And also for Lincoln, first time in 4 seasons, he does not start the year with a starting quarterback named Caleb Williams. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Moss was awesome in the bowl game. It's different starting out the season. Finally, as I reported Tuesday, USC is the nation's second most overrated team in the college football playoff era based on the AP preseason polls. Another loss on a national stage will certainly add to that reputation.
Yeah, well, hopefully pressure builds diamonds, and that's all over Lincoln Riley as he becomes joining the Big Ten in general. More on that game in just a little bit. But, of course, tomorrow we need to get a best bet football returning with week 1. The marquee matchup that is close between Power 5 conferences is North Carolina heading to Minnesota. We've already seen that line. UNC opening up as an underdog. Now they're up to 1.5, 2-point favorites, depending where you look. A total of 50.5. The question, of course, UNC, who are they going to go with that quarterback? Max Johnson, Connor Harrell, and then, of course, on the Minnesota side of things, the health of their skill position players. In general, Darius Taylor, the star running back, also up in the air when his status. Brett, your favorite bet when it comes to tomorrow's matchup between these two Power Fives?
I like the under in this game. Minnesota's top running back, Darius Taylor, and top wide receiver, Daniel Jackson, probably won't play. Likely won't get official word of this closer to kickoff. But without them, a source told me, I'll clean this up, we're a family show. Basically, Minnesota is effed if those guys can't go. And then you look at North Carolina. Historically, they're slow out of the gate. The last 4 openers against FBS teams, the USC game did not have more than 48 total points scored. North Carolina and Mac Brown, no more Drake May. You're adjusting now at quarterback with Max Johnson and Connor Harrell. I think it'll be a heavy dose of Hampton running the ball. I think we kind of saw that Florida State Georgia Tech game, how these games may start to look more NFL-like, where teams try to milk out possessions, shorten the clock, shorten the game. I think that's what we'll see Thursday night. So I'm going under 50.5 with the Tar Heels and the Gophers.
You mentioned the loss of Drake May. The era is over. Now we have 2 quarterbacks probably splitting time in general this game. That leads to my best bet of this one, and I'm going to give one out here. O'Marin Hampton, I like him to get 95.5 rushing yards over that. I think he's going to go for 100 plus. That's where you can find the number. He's over that in 6 of his last 8 games to end the season, averaging about 6 yards per rush. And you mentioned Minnesota without Taylor, without their skill position players, they're going to struggle on offense. That means there's more possession time for UNC. They become the favorites. They're probably going to win, which means more carries for Hampton toward the end of the game. I think this adds up perfectly for a bounce back game for Hampton, who didn't rush that well against Minnesota last year. Now he gets Minnesota and the rush defense of this season that has not taken that step forward. A new defensive coordinator, I think, will take time to adjust. I like Hampton to do some damage. Colin, you like North Carolina as well. I don't know if you co-sign or agree that Hampton's in for a big day, but why do you like the Tar Heels?
Well, Hampton's always in for a big day because he's one of the most elusive running backs in college football. So he just needs his offensive line to block for him. But I love North Carolina in this matchup. Brett's talking about North Carolina starting slow as far as points on the scoreboard. Let's talk about PJ Fleck being slow. He's covered 2 of only 7 openers with Minnesota since he's been there. It's even worse if you go back to Western Michigan days. And when you look at this injury report that's coming out with Darius Taylor not there, this is what Minnesota does. They pound the rock at the rate of what service academies do. So when you step away from that, you're putting all the pressure on your new quarterback, New Hampshire transfer, Max Brosmer. And if you go into Max Brosmer's numbers here, his 4-year career at New Hampshire, only 10% of his passing attempts were longer than 20 yards. Now, the kid can move. He can get out of the pocket. He can make dink and dunk throws. But there is absolutely zero explosive element to this offense. And Minnesota is going to need that against a UNC team that thrives on creating explosives every game that they're in to get to the window and catch tickets. So I like North Carolina here. The injury to Darius Taylor, I believe PJ Fleck said in his presser, you'll find out 2 hours before the game. So I expect the line to move even more when that's announced, but it's kind of a guessing game until we get there. But Minnesota's just got no explosive here whatsoever, and pinning your hopes on an FCS quarterback in game 1. Youch.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting game, to say the least. And just a reminder, right? Like, you put this in the app when UNC was underdogs. It's follow Colin in the app, follow Brett in the app. They put their picks there. You're going to get closing line value. We saw that with this one, and the line could even take off even more. But let's shift to just this weekend in general. I mentioned all 3 marquee matchups. Funny enough, all 3 of our best bets circle those 3 games. I'll go to Brett first, actually, here, because I just heard from you, Colin. Brett, your favorite bet of this weekend is out in that Texas A&M Notre Dame game.
Yeah, it's a lot of the things that Colin outlined as far as how important this game is to Notre Dame. I like under 46.5. I think a couple of weeks ago in the early lines, you could have got 49. That's obviously crashed, but I still like under 46.5. Again, Colin lined it out perfectly. Riley Leonard transfers in at quarterback for Notre Dame. We'll guess who his coach was last year, Mike Elko. He knows exactly what Riley Leonard will want to do. Elko also formerly was a coach at Notre Dame, so he's got some insight into how the Irish work. But then, probably more importantly, Notre Dame will be starting a true freshman at left tackle. They will be starting a redshirt freshman at left guard. So you're protecting the blind side with 2 freshmen in College Station. Yeah, good luck with that. Also, finally, from people I've talked to, the attitude in College Station is a total 180 difference from when Jimbo Fisher was there. Really, really high expectations, really enthusiastic with what Mike Elko has done in a short time there. And also, my gosh, Mike Elko can win at Duke. What in the world's he going to do at College Station with all those resources? I think this will be a slow game, kind of like what I referenced with Minnesota, North Carolina. I think there's going to be a huge emphasis put on possessions. I think there will be not that many possessions, and we get a lower scoring game with the offenses that will probably be struggling out of the gate in week 1.
Yeah, the familiarity and then not having the blindside blocks, or at least experienced blindside blocks, is definitely going to put Riley Leonard in for a debut as an Irishman. But Colin, your best bet, you're heading out to Clemson, Georgia, out in Atlanta. I'm excited for this one. Where do you lean, or where's your best bet in this matchup?
Well, the number is right, but there is just way too much love for Georgia, a team that is expected to have multiple suspensions that'll happen on both sides of the ball. Everybody knows about the DUI and the reckless driving that's happened with multiple players here, but the big name is Florida transfer Trevor Etienne. He's expected to be a part of this group that's going to be suspended for this game, whether it's a quarter, a half, or a full game. We won't know until those reports are put out. But that's a hit on a running back depth chart with Georgia that already had an issue with Rod Robinson being out with a toe injury. So there's essentially no depth at running back for Georgia. They have a walk-on from Texas that's expected to get a lot of carries. So you're going to see Carson Beck throwing the ball a lot. That kind of feeds into what Clemson does best, and they have a great defensive line that can get after Carson Beck. And Clemson fields on offense, one of the best offensive line and running back combinations in the country. Phil Maffa is going to take all the carries here. He's had to share time with Will Shipley and Kobe Pace from the years past, but Phil Maffa is the real deal. And I think one thing that is not really being discussed in this game is that Dabo Swinney went out and got Matt Luke to be their new offensive line coach at Clemson. His former job, the offensive line coach for Kirby at Georgia. So if anybody knows how to scheme, how to plan from an offensive line trench perspective and get Phil Maffa into open space and create some explosives, it's going to be Matt Luke here for Clemson. So, with depth issues on the Georgia defensive line, they've got 2 injuries that are happening on the interior. They took Mikel Williams, their best player on defense. They pushed him off defensive edge, threw him back at outside linebacker on the depth chart. There's a lot of changes on the Georgia side. There's injuries, there's suspensions. I think Clemson is filled up. Upset. It's a PG show, so I can't say what they are, but at the same time, it's like they see the point spread, they know what it is, they think it's too much, and Georgia's going to have some missing players on this field.
Listen, I don't even think this is a family-friendly show. You can say whatever you want. I said you were curb stomping Brian Kelly and the Tigers. You can say what you want, but I agree. I think this is a great matchup for Clemson and a great spot for them to start off strong. And I know you guys, Stuckey, are in on Clemson futures. I also hopped aboard on that one, tailed you guys on that one. Feeling good after that Florida State Week 0 loss. My best bet in particular is out in that USC LSU game. We're out in Las Vegas, and I like the Trojans. I like them plus 4.5. We've seen that line drop down from 6 to 4.5. The money's still pouring in on LSU, yet the line is moving toward the Trojans. It makes you think, why is that happening? I agree with you, Colin. The overhaul of the entire team, the coordinators, Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., there is so much for LSU to fix in just a short span of times. And Brett, you mentioned it. Last year they had no defense, USC, so they can't get worse at defense. I think USC has the opportunity to keep this close. I think this is going to come down to the wire, possibly a field goal game. I think the Trojans are live. Fight on. But all right, there we go. I like USC plus 4.5. Brett likes the under, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, and Colin on Clemson in the first half. Thank you guys for hopping on, and we'll talk to you next week.